Hello everyone, this is Venom Geek Media here, and we're going to be continuing this sort of discussion series with sort of following on from last week's discussion where we talked about the Jem'hadar. Now at this point I should have released the Battle Space episode, and given that's the finale of the Cardassian War, I'm going to be doing a series of Q&A videos about the Cardassian War where we kind of unpack the issues and the topics and themes of that series. So if you've got any sort of questions or anything like that, definitely either share those in the comments below, or I'll have a pinned comment where you can ask those questions, or on the posts or on that video. And yeah, let me know what questions or ideas you have about the Cardassian border war. But carrying on with today's video, and really just picking up where we left off. Last time we talked about the Jem'hadar, and I said I was going to do a sort of a comparative video about clone troopers and Jem'hadar, and I think maybe I'll do one where I compare the themes, but I think today I'd like to compare them really as depictions of soldiers in science fiction settings, and as bred soldiers, and the supposedly the act soldiers of their respective universes, and sort of just comparing their equipment and training and all of that. So let's get into it. So firstly, let's just start with kind of the basics of the Jem'hadar, which would be their life cycle. So Jem'hadar are generated in birthing chambers or a hatchery, much like the clones are, and their growth cycle is accelerated again like the clones, but to a much greater extent. So they reach full maturity in 3 days, and do not procreate naturally. So that's impressive. That's much faster than a clone trooper. Still not quite fast as a battle droid, which takes hours, mere hours if that. But that's quick. That's really quick. So I mean, that's the first thing to sort of talk about with the Jem'hadar, is how quickly they develop compared to the clone troopers. The clone troopers take about 10 years, well, 9 to 10 years to mature. Now, there are some advantages to that. The clone troopers can be taught and trained very effectively. Now, notionally, the Jem'hadar are pre-programmed with some sort of knowledge. Equally, I'm sure there's some training. Training is always going to be beneficial, and experience is always going to be beneficial, even if certain skills are sort of hardwired into them through their genetic programming. Even so, it's like having experience and drilling stuff and all of that. It's very helpful, and certainly the clones make great use of that. The Jem'hadar, I think that just shows you how the Dominion regard them, which is just they are completely expendable. And that's a point I made in my previous video, and that's not something you can say for the clone troopers. Clone troopers, you lose a clone trooper, that's a big loss. Clone troopers are a considerable investment on the part of the Republic, whereas the Jem'hadar don't seem to be at all. They really are expendable, and that's a big difference between the two. Like, equally, that didn't stop people from regarding the clone troopers as expendable in themselves. Let's now talk about their sort of physiology, physical capacities. They're pretty similar. Jem'hadar are, from what we see, resilient, but they can be used, but they aren't that much. They may be stronger than your average human, but they're not that much stronger. They're tough, though. They're very tough. And so phasers set on stun have no effect. Now, that sounds like a great advantage. Well, it doesn't. It just means they can't be captured. But also, it's like most species have some piece of equipment that stops that. So the Cardassians and Klingons wear body armor, and that probably makes stun less effective. So that's not unique to them. And they still can't survive being shot. And we'll talk about that when it comes to equipment. They also have the ability to shroud themselves, which I believe is biological, although it's never really fully explained, and they don't use it that often. It's a very handy feature, and certainly the clones don't have that. The clones are really just squishy humans by comparison. with sort of, again, your above average strength and all of that, but they're still squishy humans, so they need a lot more help than the Jem'hadar. I think there's a lot with the Jem'hadar that do give them a physical edge, but I think there's other areas where they fall deficient, which we'll get onto. So then we'll get onto intelligence. Jem'hadar are not smart, not through any fault. It's more they don't really have the opportunity to be smart. Given that their lifespan is about 15 years at the most, they don't really have the chance to acquire significant amounts of knowledge. It's like clone troopers, they've got 10 years before they even enter combat. Well, 9 years before they even enter combat. And then if they survive, and they, because they've had all this training and everything, and they're a considerable investment, they're more probable to survive. And that means they can bring forward more intelligence. And that means they can then go back to the next generation of clone troopers and train them up with their experience. And that's something that the Jem'hadar probably don't have. I think they lack an ability to acquire experience and wisdom. And that's also because they outsource that reasoning to the Vorta. And there's a strong mechanism in place, that means that they're socialized to do that. Whereas the clones, okay, they've notionally been told that they need to be docile and do what the Jedi tell them. They don't, because they've still got enough of that Jango Fett genome in them. So then actually let's talk about methods of control. So with the clones, it's the inhibitor chip. But that doesn't really help. Certainly not long term. Short term, it makes them do the things that you want them to do. But long term, they're smart enough to figure it out and either ditch them or just disobey orders. Jem'hadar don't, and it's not only that they're sort of bred to be docile, and they have the control mechanism of, yes, the Ketracel White, which they are reliant upon, and that is, conditional upon their obedience. It's more that also just as a society, they have learned to accept submission to the Vorta. That is just the way things are, and they don't see anything wrong with that, unlike the clones, which do think about their position and do seek to change it. And so in that regard, the clones are much smarter than the Jem'hadar, but that's because they have the opportunity to be, and that's where that long-term investment really comes in for the clones. Let's talk about equipment. So this is quite interesting. Jem'hadar are pretty lightly equipped, and given their expendability, well, that's fair enough. But it all looks pretty reasonable. Military kit and rigging. It's all quite rugged and reliable and works well with their camouflaging. And it looks like they preserve a lot of mobility as well. They're not encumbered that much as soldiers, and it's like, well, they're naturally resilient, but also they're pretty expendable anyway, so don't overburden them with equipment. I think they make for a good modern sort of, well, not modern, but sci-fi battlefield unit that's quite realistic. It's like, yes, okay, you could have body armor and all that, but these guys are just very quick, and they have other things like their ability to shroud that counteract that. So I think for the Jem'hadar, they are more lightly equipped, but that's fine, and they have natural advantages that mean they don't need so much equipment. Now with the clones have a lot of equipment. They have their helmets and their armor and all the additional stuff that can be stacked on the top. Now, the critical thing is that it's protective. And that does make a big difference, especially against the Jem'hadar, actually. And I'll get into that. It does improve their survivability. And again, considering that clones, you're investing in the future with clones, you want them to survive and acquire that experience and knowledge and pass that on to then future generations of clones for them to then become more effective soldiers. then yeah, you want to have means of keeping them alive. And so yeah, safe, protective armor is a pretty smart idea for that kind of soldier. It's a pretty necessary investment. Now let's talk specifically about the weaponry. Um, the Jem'hadar rifle I really like it. I think it's very good for Star Trek. Some of these Star Trek rifles are very good. They're very compact. They make sense for use in confined spaces of a starship. And what I really like about the Jem'hadar weapon is it's got a bayonet. That is indispensable, right? It's like you think you won't need it until you really need it. So, it's very smart that the Jem'hadar do have those, and it makes them look extra mean. The rifle itself is a pretty solid battle rifle. It's got some good range and power to it. But one of the advantages this rifle has in particular is it has an anticoagulant element, so if you're hit, you'll bleed out. Now, that would be very effective, except clone armor is specifically designed to protect the wearer in such a way, and that's actually how most modern body armor is. It's like it keeps your insides in. So actually, that advantage would be nullified. Equally, you look at the clone weapons, and they're not nearly as ergonomic, I would say. They're much bulkier and harder to handle, much more clumsy, and they don't feature a bayonet, so if you get into close quarters and you don't have training, you're in trouble. And their whole thing is being more ionized, so they destroy droids. And it's like, that's great, except you're not fighting droids, you're fighting Jem'hadar. So again, maybe they'd be more effective on people wearing personal shields, but again, the Jem'hadar aren't using that, so what kind of advantage is that really? I don't think it's that significant, and the weapons are significantly less ergonomic compared to the Jem'hadar weapon, which is very sensibly designed for what you'll find in most science fiction space battles, which is going to be boarding engagements. It's very good for that, and it's got enough range and power for most instances in the field. Whereas the clone carbine, okay, that's all right, but it's pretty basic and rudimentary, and the actual rifle that they were meant to be using is way too big. It's completely the wrong equipment, the right equipment for the wrong war. So, those are your comparisons in terms of equipment and training and gear and all of this, and sort of mentalities. And I think, really, the conclusion I would come to, I put a vote up. I'll put a vote up in the box, the box at the top, where you can vote on who you think would win. But my verdict on the matter of clones against Jem'hadar is a nuanced one, because it really depends on the frame of reference. I think in a short-term battle, with all these things taken into consideration, Jem'hadar are going to win. They are just so potent on the battlefield. They have just nothing holding them back. None of the inhibitions that clones do. And clones aren't that inhibited, but Jem'hadar really aren't. They have slightly better gear. They've got more natural advantages. It's like, yes, the clones have all this equipment, but natural advantages are going to always kind of help you with that. But there's a big caveat to that, and that is long term. So what if the clones are in this war against the Jem'hadar? What if the Republic is fighting the Dominion for like 5-10 years? Then I think you'd see the tables really start to turn, because I think, like I say, you're investing in that future, and they would acquire that experience and that knowledge and that wisdom, and they would be able to pass that on to the future generations of clones, and that is what's going to win the Republic, that conflict. So I think, yeah, ultimately, long term, clones would win. But yeah, those are my thoughts, and that's how you think about things. Is what's a good short term? What makes a good short term warrior is not what makes a good career soldier necessarily. But But those are just my thoughts. What are your guys? Absolutely, get in that vote. I'll put that up. Let me know your sort of more nuanced opinions in the comments below, and I'll see you guys in the next video.